The church lied to your wife, and you probably used it against her without even knowing it. I'm Anthony, this is My Autistic Lens, and I spent almost 10 years as a pastor watching the church get this all wrong. The church has spent centuries telling women to sit down and be quiet, citing Paul as their authority. But if you go back to the Old Testament, the actual foundation, you get a completely different picture. Well, let's first talk about Deborah, a woman who led armies. And notice the generals didn't reluctantly accept her. They begged her to come. Barak essentially said he wouldn't go into battle without her. That is not the portrait of a culture that believed women had no authority. Look at the domestic picture throughout the Old Testament. Women negotiated between themselves, made household decisions, and informed their husbands of the outcome. The husband didn't override it, didn't argue. They just went with it because the home was her domain and her jurisdiction. The man's job was to provision the things she needed and to make sure she had what she needed to run it the way she saw fit. Proverbs 31 makes this explicit. That woman is buying fields, running businesses, managing the household economy. Her husband sits at the city gates, which means he has standing in the community, and that standing is because of her. She is the engine. He's the support structure. And now Paul comes in, and everyone loses their minds and starts using his words to put women under their husband's boots. But let's actually read what he said. The instruction for the woman to submit to her husband is a conversation between her and Yahweh. It has nothing to do with the man. He has no role in that conversation. It is not his job to demand it, enforce it, or even remind her of it. The moment a man starts using that verse as a management tool, he has already stepped outside of his own lane. Because what are the man's instructions? Mutual submission, one to another, for one. That's the baseline. And then an additional layer on top of that, specifically for the man, he is to love his wife the way Messiah loved the assembly. And how did Messiah love the assembly? He laid his life down for it, up to and including death. That is not the portrait of a king barking orders. That is the portrait of a man whose entire existence is oriented around her safety, her security, and her provision. She makes the decisions. He makes sure she has everything she needs to make them. He's the shield. She is the architect. And then look at Priscilla in the New Testament. She and Aquila are instructing Apollos, a male teacher, in the way of Yahweh more accurately. And Priscilla is named first in most references, which in their culture was not accidental. She carried authority over men and in spiritual matters. So what does the full picture look like when you let the whole text speak instead of cherry-picking Paul out of context? The woman runs the home. The man resources it and protects it. The woman carries spiritual authority, and the man lays his life down in service to her and the family. Nobody is commanding anyone. Nobody is enforcing submission. It's a partnership where each person's role serves the other. The church didn't just misread Paul. They used Paul to overwrite the Old Testament. And the Old Testament was never consulted to correct them. And I would consider this understanding that I've laid before you a more loving, kind, and Yeshua-centered position.